part two of risk assessment. Going to go into a little bit more detail about your capsizing. What year was
this? Has been about 96, I think. It was summer Southeast seine season on a boat called the Baranoff Queen, which is still has been brought back and still fishes out of catch can.
How do you bring something back?
Well, it didn't sink. So, what happens is it gets totaled and the bank sells it as a salvaged vessel and somebody else. But I don't know who the current owner is, but I do see it here in the harbors.
How do you recover it? So the state it was in after it.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the actual rollover. So we had we had done a bunch of work to that boat. It was the second season. The first season we kind of made it through with that in 95, I believe. In the 96 we come around. And Dad, at the time, people were going to what they call a trolley system on the booms so that you could move the net around as you're piling the net back, and then you could reduce your need for another crew member. So that's what we were doing. We were running a 3-man crew. So that's 2 people in the net, the captain running the purse, and then one guy on the skiff. So you have 4 people. So what that does is reduce everybody gets another percentage or 2. So anyway, we're running that. That's to say what had happened was he'd put new rigging on the boat. Now, this is known in the crab world, but as you add more weight higher on a boat, you change the center of gravity. And so we don't know if this is the cause of the rollover, but the boat was dry, meaning no water in the tank, no. And the skiff was on the back deck, and you're traveling on calm water, and the ComNav rudder, autopilot rudder feedback arm came off of its connection. Therefore, the autopilot has no feedback of where the rudder is. So it does this hard over deal. And so it just went hard over.
So
full speed.
Where was this connection?
It's in the lazarette, which is in the stern of the boat. And so it's often on seiners covered by the access is covered by the net. Mm-hmm. And we dealt with it the last time because it had come off the last time we had the same problem, and we stopped and fixed it. Thought it had it fixed, but then it came off again. And so then the boat goes hard over. I'm in the wheelhouse with Dan. There's 2 other guys down in the kind of forecastle area engine room. The boat goes hard over, and there's just an intuitive knowledge as a person. Wow, this boat is not coming back. Been in rough water, the boat's point. What it gets to a point where you're like, I don't think this thing is going to come back. So both Dan and I, you imagine the boat and the wheelhouse is at, let's say, 80 degrees or something, 75 degrees. We crawled out the upper side window of the wheelhouse, he and I together. And we slowly, as the boat gained water and started sinking or house down or whatever, capsizing, we just walked straight up to the keel.
So how fast was this?
Did it
hang for a second?
It hung at the water line. And then you felt it go past its point of no return. And you're like, okay, it's not returning. Okay, now we're talking minutes, maybe 1 to 2, 3 minutes where the cabin's now going under. We noticed the other guys get out, so we're happy about that. And we walked up to the keel. Now, the keel cooler is the keel. So it's actually, we're sitting on the steel keel. And it's a box shape, and it's warm. And you hear the engine running upside down, crazy. And you're listening to this engine run. But now we got the other guys in the water. But you got to imagine you're probably 10 feet above them because they're in the water. And it's a slippery hull.
So you're all the way over at this point.
Yeah. Now, so slowly keel up, completely capsized.
Did you guys stay on it as it was rolling over? So you just
I never got wet.
Like a hamster on the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Dan and I both walked straight to the keel, or, clambered, shall we say, to the keel as it's slowly filling with water and going turtle up, The other guys, too, Daryl and Paul, are in the water. But now they can't get up on the keel because of kind of the slimy kind of camber of the keel. But they had gotten the life ring off. And they throw the life ring up to us and the line up to us, and then we were able to pull them up. So now we're all 4 on the keel, and you're sitting there. And then off towards land, which would be to the west, most of the boats are further along, closer to the shore there, and because we're all going out to Hidden Falls to do a fishing opening, and so eventually somebody notices us. We got nothing. We have no way to send a signal, whatever. It's a beautiful morning, mirror calm day, not even a breath of wind. And eventually somebody sees us and comes over. It's the Molly, an old wooden seiner. And we get off on the Molly.
So did you have life jackets on this time?
Was nothing. No, we don't have survival suits. This is another fallacy about the survival suit and the raft thing, so harkening back to the last episode, the raft never deploys because it's never gotten deep enough to deploy. The hydrostatic releases are set at a certain depth, 20, 30 feet, whatever. And so it never deploys. And life jackets are all stored. You don't have time. So I can imagine somebody in the middle of the night in a storm, unless you're sleeping in your survival suit, which most guys don't. You just don't. It's just too chaotic. It wasn't even that chaotic. It was over so quick. You just don't have time. And so, these are all idyllic kind of scenarios that you're going to get in your life jacket and jump, or your survival suit. We had survival suits. We had a raft, and we had life jackets. None of that.
Yeah.
The thing that came into play was the life ring, though.
Well, I think when you look at or watch some film or read about captains who know there could be a situation, so like, hey, just in case, let's get this stuff out, let's get this stuff ready, and then you get toward that point of this is a real big risk. Just get in the suits, because it's better to be
where you find
cautious.
That is where you have flooding and things develop slower. Hey, we got a Mayday call off. We have flooding. But the biggest casualties in in Alaska fishing were capsizings, and they're mostly capsizing in the Bering Sea during crab seasons, or in rough ocean conditions where there's no time. The boat just goes up. We were in, probably, if you're going to capsize, probably the most ideal situation you could ever be in to capsize. But so as the story goes, we get off. Now, it just so happens that the Coast Guard in Petersburg is doing a family day on their cutter, and they're about 10 minutes behind us, or from us getting off. And pretty soon, this 110 footer shows up. Okay, the Molly, they're going to go fish. Hey, they dump us off on this Coast, and the Coast Guard's got families on there. They got barbecue going because it's family day, And so now we're sitting on this 110 footer. And the one thing, if you think about, okay, this is a rescue vessel. Okay, we kind of give them our story, blah, blah, blah. Well, this boat is idling next to this slowly sinking boat. And what happens is the boat eventually starts to fill up with water and goes stern up. And I have a picture of it, with the stern poking out of the water by 10 feet and the seine skiff still strapped to the stern. And if I have any ego or anything to brag about in life, is that I was a skiff man. Our job is to strap the skiff down. It was secured well enough. Yeah. It did not come off. So, I mean, that's a minor point to brag about. But so anyway, eventually what happens is Dan calls insurance. All this is going on. This is 96. Cell phones really aren't a thing yet, but they're kind of a thing. And eventually there's a Halverson scrap barge going by, and they get permission to take this stern up boat, capsized boat, and strap it to this empty barge with big lines. So we get on the barge, we, the crew, get on the barge, we take these big hawsers and we tie it off through the holes or whatever we did. And they slowly inch this boat. Imagine it hanging vertical, tied to a barge, over to a big beach. And it's coincidentally it's high tide. And they just take this and they push it in as far as they can, and then they untie it, and we untie it. They back the barge out. The tide goes out, and you couldn't have picked a better beach. It's a big, flat, muddy, beach, and the boat is dry. I mean, laying on a big, muddy beach on its side. So the barge is like, hey, we got to go. They call this tugboat out of Petersburg. Art Murphy is the name, all I can remember. And I think the name of the tug was the Seahorse. We're talking a 40s, 50s steel old thing. And it's just him, no crew member, just Art. He probably weighs about 400 pounds and he ain't moving from the wheelhouse. So we move on to the Seahorse. I hope that's the name of it.
It's all still same day.
Yeah, we're talking late evening now because we capsized probably 8, 9 in the morning.
So you're done with your coffee, had your breakfast, and then
and we're just going out to the Hidden Falls, and it's a full.
Then you got the barbecue on the Coast Guard boat.
Yeah,
so
then the barbecue. This is a big day.
This is like a training run. This is
So then we get on the Seahorse, and then we start to formulate this plan. Okay, well, let's salvage this thing. Okay, let's get it refloated. Blah blah blah. So it's laying on its side. Well, the idea is, okay, we'll go in and we'll kind of get it up on its shine and keel. So it's kind of semi upright. And then as the tide floats in, we'll give it a little tug and see if we can refloat it. But we have to go in and pump all the cavities. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember. I think he had a skiff. So we're able to get in there at low tide with a trash pump, a 2-inch gas pump. We go in all the cavities and suck all the water out, try to seal up things that might fill up with water as the tide comes in. But what you don't realize, one thing you don't think about when a boat sinks is that all the fuel comes out the vents. So everything is covered in diesel. Mm. So within minutes, everything you touch is just swimming in diesel. So you reek like diesel. So we do that. The tide comes in probably in the middle of the night. I vaguely remember it being dark, and this is July. So
is the net still attached?
Yeah, the net's still there. The skiff is still attached, and it's just hanging there precariously. So then we get a big line to it. They got hydraulics on the Seahorse, and as the tide comes in, we give it a tug, and we pull it. It doesn't go vertical. It just lays over and sinks again. Mm. So this is the middle of the night. Now you're like, okay, now it's high tide. We got to wait. So the next day, same thing. Okay, we'll make a different plan. We kind of get another plan, similar kind of thing going. We got to get a little bit, so we do it again, and it sinks on the next high tide, which is like midday the following day. But this time, we're like, we got to get that net and skiff off there. Just so happens, so we were able to bust the skiff off, get it refloated during the high tide. And then we were able to take the skiff, interestingly enough, and via some shucking and jiving, got the skiff running. Mm-hmm. So now we have a decent power skiff. We get the net off there, which the net had slid and all the weight was to one side. That was hard, making it hard to get it vertical. But we're sleeping on this boat. We're diesel covered. Art Murphy is up there, 300 pounds. I'll take 100 pounds off. He's 300 pounds. He's missing a lower jaw. So you got to remember, because he had either chewed tobacco and lost his jaw. So he's just this character of a guy in his wheelhouse. I just have these memories of him. And I just remember him gnawing on a piece of ham with this no lower jaw as we're trying to salvage this boat. We reek like diesel. So one of our friends comes along after the seine opener. Now it's the next day, whatever, late in the evening. They come through and they take the net away. And now we have the skiff off there. And on our third attempt, 2 days of salvage attempts, we get this thing refloated. And we tow it back into Petersburg. We go up and we buy some new clothes because we just take a shower or two because we smell like diesel. And eventually we tow it back to Ketchikan, and the insurance basically totals it.
Yeah. It's like,
so, I mean, there's an addendum to this story, and it's kind of an interesting addendum. This is 1st of July. There's no boats available to kind of take over and try to finish out your season. Seine seasons really don't get going until mid-July. Eventually, Dan rounds up this old wooden seiner called the Veribus. And the Veribus was owned by Brett Claggett. He was a Metlakatla. Well, he grew up in Ketchikan, but the boat was in Metlakatla. We go over and get this thing. We put our net on it. We're like late July. We roll on down into the opening south of town here down on Cone Island, and we start fishing. We're talking 3-4 weeks later from the debacle capsizing. And I mean, there's lots of fish. And we start loading this boat up, and we loaded up in one day. We were 30 40,000. Well, at this point, I don't know, remember what that boat hauled, maybe 40,000 pounds. It was an old boat, dry tank, meaning it was like a 1930s era boat, you know. We load this boat up. I'm like, all right, we're back in the game. And we're driving back into Ketchikan to unload. We get to about Mountain Point here, and we're all up on the wheelhouse, beautiful summer evening, you know, kind of basking in the glory of coming back from this capsizing, and the boat takes this unnerving lurch to the left. And we look back, and the whole stern is underwater. And we're like, oh shit, we're sinking again, you know? And so I literally jump off the wheelhouse. I run across the net, jump in the skiff. And I said, just let me go. I'll pull the skiff off here. I'll pull the net off with the skiff, but it's dusk and dark and there's boats going by. And Dan's like, hold on. Let's just not set this net in the middle of everywhere here. And so through some cooler heads, another boat, the North Cape comes up, Gary, and we reel the net off onto him, which allows the boat to come up a foot or two out of the water. And we waddle in precariously to the tender, pitch all our fish off. And the next morning we investigate what had happened with this boat is that it had never been fished with any kind of regularity. So all the planks above the waterline had shrunk. You see what I mean? And so then as we added all this weight and fish and net and everything to it, it started leaking and filled up the lazarette with water. And there was no drain from the laz, which is the stern of the boat, into the main bilge. So no way to pump the water out.
Whoa.
And it most likely wouldn't have sunk just by filling up the lazarette, but it was not stable. So anyway, that said, we fished out the rest of the season with that boat at Darrell Welk at the pump almost continually whenever we left the harbor.
Is that Riley's dad?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Riley in class. I think she's still playing softball down south.
Yep. That's her dad. And he's been a successful charter fisherman. As a matter of fact, he's the one that got me into charter fishing. Yeah. But it's a shared trauma that he and I.
Yeah.
And
so how long after that did you continue to commercial fish?
Oh, I fished for Dan for another 2 or 3 years. He got a different boat. We were very successful on the Little Lady, which he owned just till a few years later. And so I per-se'd into the late 90s, and then I got some IFQ and got my own boat and a Dungeness S permit, and a commercial fish Dungeness for about 10 years, and cuke dove. And, you know, I have a whole series of stories of accidents on that boat, you know, that are, once again, I was solo. Most of these stories don't, you know, when guys are fishing alone in the winter time, you just don't talk about them amongst friends, but not like in podcast form, you know? So there lessons learned in all of that, you know?
Yeah. So do you, it goes back to the risk assessment thing. You obviously know there's an inherent risk. Like when these sort of things happen, do you take it as I need to get out of this? I need to not do it anymore. Like, or this is just part of there's many people who come up, they hate it, it's miserable, and they're done after 1 or 2 years. So.
Well, I think part of it is if it scares you. And if it scares you and you don't feel in control. And part of I don't think I ever felt scared in that capsize. And I knew I was safe almost from the minute it happened because I never felt. Now, Darrell and Paul had a different experience. They were in the V berth and had to scramble on the sides of things and stuff's falling on them, they said. It's scary.
Yeah.
Oh, am I going to get out?
Yeah.
And I never felt particularly scared. I felt almost, and then I capsized one other time in a seine skiff off of Noe's Island. And once again, it happened so fast, I jumped in the water and never felt scared. And then there are times, the times I felt more scared is when I'm in really rough water at night and you can't see what's coming at you. And you know that what happens is that your margin of error I think that's the right term, decreases. So you have less margin of error if it's rough water, it's dark, and you're depending on this particular engine and vessel to keep you safe. So if one thing goes wrong, then another thing goes wrong. And then you have the cascading effect of a disaster. And in the cases of where I've had disasters or, you know, accidents, it's never cascaded too far down the chain of events. And I don't know if that's, I don't want to say luck, because it's not luck. It's maybe some of it's preparedness, some of it's having a, like I said in the last, having a secondary plan. If this goes, then I do X. You know, there's a little bit of that playing out in your head.
Yeah.
So back to the whole thing. Well, no, I don't think I ever wanted to get out because I thought it was unsafe. But there is a little bit of anxiety that worked on me as you assess weather. And do I want to go now? And if you do that continually, it wears on you. Like, I'm always wondering, should I go? Should I go? When do I go? You know, and you're making these assessments. And I think that's why I never really wanted to fly, because the speed and the development of the disaster is so much faster. And the assessment of the weather, okay, I sometimes fantasize, well, if I was in a plane and I had to make a decision to turn here and leave or change my course or whatever, you don't have time. You have to know ahead. It's just not a lot of time. And so in a boat, you know, it can happen fast too. I don't know. So I never really thought about getting out. I just thought about changing how I did things.
Yes. Well, you talked about growing up here, and so you've had experiences where when you were leaving Penick Island and you were trying to get the seventh wave. So you've been in the water before, and you've had experiences. So it's not the first time you've ever really been on a boat. There's an emergency. You've had these gradual sort of things that make you a little bit not desensitized to it, but a little bit used to that. So the cascade for someone else is just the next element of a problem to you. So that sort of experience, I think, can be probably pretty important in allowing you to kind of know what to do and not to be scared off by it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that maybe you know, there was this phenomena that I noticed in college when I was purse-seining, and it was you're excited, we're going to go do this season. You're doing all your preseason work. You have this potential to make this money, and it's youthful. It's exciting. It's an adventure. You know, hey, we're on this boat. We don't know what we're going to catch. We don't know what we're going to see. Whales, fish. And there's a little bit of I would call it a like gold rush mentality to commercial fishing.
Yeah.
And then you get to about 3/4 point. You're tired of these people that you're on this boat with. You're irritated by some of them. You're annoyed. You don't like the decisions the captain has made. You haven't made as much money as you thought. I mean, all these little effects. So you get done with the season. You're like, God, I'm never going to do that again. That sucks. But then about January, you're like, God, wouldn't it be cool? It's like, I think it's like what mothers must go through with birth.
Oh.
It's horrible. It's traumatic. They hate it. And then like 3 years later, they have this fuzzy memory of the misery.
Abby's already kind of getting there with like, you know, a second one, you know, it's like, man, like,
what are you, have you forgot?
We don't even have teeth yet. And she's crying and she's maybe teething and just can't reason with them. But you know, the cute moments and when she's happy and smiling, like
blissful.
It's great. But
it's blissful. It's just like fishing. When you roll that 10,000 fish set on board and you just made $2,000 in an hour and you're like, what could be better?
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same kind of delusional memory loss, I call it, or something to that effect. So I think that happens with all fishermen. They're slightly traumatized probably every time they go out, and then they either get to the point where they are numbed by their trauma, or they just don't. You know, that it's just a way of life for them.
Yeah.
You know, maybe for me it became a way of life, and you don't think of it. Like, I don't think any airline pilot gets in their plane thinking, yeah, I may not come back today. You know, they just don't operate that way, you know?
No. And that's the amount of the sophisticated, the autopilots and the gear and the technology has improved so much.
The training.
Yeah.
The training and the technology is so good. It's not so much that on, sorry.
It's all right.
With commercial fishermen, we're kind of these one-man shows. There's nothing telling us you can't go on this weather. Yeah. You can go in the worst weather you want. Nobody's there to stop you. Yeah. And, you know, you have maybe better navigational stuff with the GPS now and chart program. But I think what that does is just maybe even leads to where I see that stuff helping is as a commercial fisherman, and have a new crew on board.
Mm-hmm.
What that technology allows you to do is give your crew a little bit of educational advantage. They don't have to actually use an actual physical chart and plot out a course. And if there's fog, they still got to know how to read a radar. But they still got to know where they are. I don't know if I told you that story of my first outing on the Alsec under Larry Painter. Stark memory, when I was about 16, I went around the island here with him on a crab and shrimp trip. I just wanted to go and experience it. And they put me at the wheel at night as the rest of the crew had dinner, and the boat's cruising up Beam Canal, and the radar's going, and I could see the radar, I could see the land. And Larry comes back up to the wheelhouse after dinner, and he says, well, where are we at? And I'm like, I don't know where we're at.
We're behind Ketchikan.
And he's like, wrong answer. It's just still burned in my soul.
Mm-hmm.
You always know where you're at when you're running a boat, because the next thing is you hit something because you don't know where you're at.
Yeah. So let's go to the technology a little bit there. Princess Sophia, was that in 1923 or 1913? Boat coming back from Farabit.
I thought it was
Skagway.
the 20s, but I don't know.
Hits a charted rock, a reef outside of Juneau.
Right.
But
everybody dies, I think.
They're up on the rock and they can't get them off. The weather's too bad. People are able to write notes and letters and whatnot. But then as the tide comes up, the storm,
the boat falls off the rock.
Falls off, and most people aren't even found. So that was a known reef, but your navigation was way, way different. So you can think that know that there's a reef out there. The charts are pretty primitive, but it wasn't until 1940s that the military started to have low frequency radio systems that you could get some sort of understanding where you're at within like a mile.
The LORAN systems,
yeah.
you mean?
So you have within a mile or so ish. Mm-hmm. So you have these charts that are, again, still fairly primitive. And then you have that, and then it improves. When you first remember the navigation tech, what were you using?
I started out with LORAN.
Actually, maybe we start with Dead Reckoning. What is Dead Reckoning when people are using that?
Well, Dead Reckoning is just using, your compass in relationship to the chart, and then you may have a visual reference. So you can say, okay, so my first crewing was between here and Tree Point on a gillnet tender, and it was all in the summer and daylight, and I didn't do any navigating. I was just a deckhand to help on the. But the next year was done about 87. My first year sailing, I went to Ballard, and then we came up, and so you're doing all Dead Reckoning, and what that meant was you were basically traveling point to point on a known courses with land references every few miles. Canada is extremely well documented. So you could say, okay, and we had a logbook. And so you would write, okay, we just went past XYZ point, and now we're heading in this course to the next point. And once you got to that, you would log. And if it was nighttime, there'd be lights. Okay, the light would flash XYZ. You would note that, or we're going past so-and-so point. And so you're using a combination of visual reference, chart reference, and navigational aids. And it's all well and good when you're within islands in the inland passage here. Where the LORAN becomes important is when you get offshore out of visual reference. Anything visually you can cite. So they had a LORAN station here in Shoal Cove, in Carroll Inlet. I think there was one. There were 3 or 4 around the Gulf of Alaska, and those signals would go out there and would create a crosshatch. So then you could. But so I never did much offshore fishing then, so I never had to use LORAN. By the time I got started doing long lining in the early 90s, that's when the GPS system started to come in, because the military took a military technology and allowed civilian use. So GPS was developed by the military for locating, military operations, and they did not want civilians to have it, because then our adversaries would have it.
It was the same thing with rants too. I think the early stuff from the 40s that ended up being, then it became ubiquitous in the late 70s, early 80s. And then it ends up being a lot cheaper. And then same thing in the early 90s with GPS.
Yeah, now GPS, you got them on your phone. You go out hunting, you kind of know where you're at.
It tracks you whether or not you want it to.
Yeah. I mean, but that came in the early to mid 90s, and then we started on seiners. I remember being with Dan the first time when they had, you got a little laptop, and you could get a secondary GPS signal, integrate it to your laptop with different charting program, and you essentially now had all the charts and your location on a laptop. And we thought we'd died and gone to heaven. I mean, I really thought this is, and in a way, it made navigating so much easier, especially in bad weather like fog and nighttime. You can see where you're at. Before that, you're using a chart with a flashlight in your mouth or some red light in the wheelhouse, so you're not blinding yourself to exterior input. And then, you're using the compass rose on the chart, and you're saying, okay, here's the compass, here we are. Okay. And you're using your parallels to find, okay, am I here? Where am I? Okay, I'm here. And, there's just way more error built into that, especially for a new person that's just walked off the dock and is now helping you run this boat.
Yeah.
When I first started, we never took wheel watch alone. That would have been like 86 era. By 96, I'm working on a short crew and we're taking 4-hour wheel watches alone. And because of this technology, you could do that and experience, but there's, so that's kind of the progression I saw.
What about tech as far as survival stuff go? We talked a little bit about that, but when those two guys went over, did they just have regular clothes on? Were they worried about hypothermia? Because summer temperatures, the water's upper 40s, low 50s, but you can still get hypothermia happen.
Oh yeah. And they were probably only in the water for, 10 minutes max before we got them out of there. So, I don't think we did do survival suit donning drill before the season every year. And you had to go get your survival suits out. But those haven't changed. There's still these, we call them the Gumby suits, they're just a neoprene suit that you can get in your shoes and any kind of clothing you have on, but they're somewhat cumbersome. And then zipping them up is cumbersome.
You got to get it all the way up too.
Yeah, it has to seal around your face. And that's a real challenge because they're kind of a one size fits all type deal.
You don't have like a medium long.
No. And so, they're made for guys like us. I mean, there are child sizes and probably oversized ones. I never saw those, but anyway, you had to make sure the lights worked on and the strobes worked. And we would wax the zippers to make sure they're working and so forth. The most times we used survival suits was to do something where we had to get in the water and needed a repair and we didn't have a real neoprene suit on. So you jump in that and maybe go around and do something with it. But so, I mean, I don't think there's been much advance. There are these now dry suits like that. These survival guys or the rescue swimmers were, they're basically a sealed dry suit that I don't know of anybody that even has those on a boat, like a kayaker might use or whatever, they seal around your neck and around your wrists and so forth. But I don't think any commercial guys use those. I think one thing that has happened too is technology is the AIS system. So now all commercial boats have an AIS signal, which is a automated signal that the boat puts out that basically you and I can go on, and if we have the right program, and we can like where all commercial boats are.
So you can track the trawlers and just see what decimating the.
You can do that. Yeah. You can track all the cruise ships, but any commercial vessel is supposed to have that AIS system. Now, some people turn them off. I mean, I've heard of them being turned off and so forth, but that's kind of a peace of mind thing. Hey, I know where our boat is. I know what's going on with it, and I think if it disappears, somebody could, and then the other thing that's improved is the 406 EPIRBs. That said, like when we capsized, I think we had a 406 EPIRB, but I don't think it went off. I don't think it deployed. They were hydrostatic release. So like all my pleasure boats have those. And it's just a device that sits in a cradle and it's designed to deploy if the boat sinks.
It's on the outside?
Yeah, it's on the outside, like mounted on a bulkhead or somewhere. And these are fairly affordable. They're, a couple $100 and you register them. You can, I tell all my clients, hey, if you have to abandon ship, just grab this thing, take it with you, and you can manually deploy it. And it's going to tell the Coast Guard, this is where someone is, or this is where the device is. There's a person there. But I had an interesting episode with one of those at one time. I had one on my crab boat, and I was going out for my weekly crab circuit, and it had snowed like 4 or 5 inches. And so I'm cleaning all the snow off the boat before I left Bar Harbor, and I inadvertently swept the on button. And
is it that easy to trigger?
There's this particular model, I don't think now it's so simple, but it had a little on-off switch, and when I brushed the snow off it, I turned it on inadvertently and didn't know it. So I got out to about Loring.
And there wasn't like a light? Whenever I think of the EPIRB, I think of like a flashing light plus.
Yeah, it might have, but I'm driving inside. I'm not really seeing it.
So you brushed it off, didn't notice it.
Didn't even think about it. And then I'm cruising along, an hour and a half, 2 hours later, and I see this Jayhawk helicopter go over the top of me. I'm like, what the hell is that guy doing around? This is Naha. And he's like, he's on the radio eventually. Hey, we had a signal from this area of, 406 EPIRB. And the wheels are turning slow in my head. I don't know. I haven't heard a distress call, nothing. And then, the wheels grind as they grind. And I'm like, well, why would they be here? I'm the only commercial boat I've seen all day. Something's not right. That's how it played out in my head. I scrambled back, look at it and go, oh, my bad. Click, turn it off. And I called them on the VHF and I say, hey, you guys, I got to apologize. I inadvertently turned mine on when I was cleaning snow off. And they were really good about it. They're like, hey, thank you. You saved us a lot of time because we would have been searching for hours. And they went, and they were back to Sitka, 40 minutes or whatever. So.
I did, I don't know if I told you, I had an old DeLorme inReach. It was before DeLorme was bought by Garmin.
Garmin, right.
And it just has a slider switch at the bottom.
Okay.
It's a pretty tough switch to inadvertently switch over because it's like a slider switch. It doesn't have like a knob or anything on it. So just always take it. It's always in my pocket. Never turn it on.
So is that registered?
Yeah.
So your Garmin, like if you hit distress, I'm a little bit confused by that. Does this go to Garmin or does it go to the Coast Guard? Where does it go?
So here's what happened. So I never turn the thing on.
Okay.
So, but if you slide it over and then you hit the button, then it goes SOS.
Oh, so it's a two-part thing. Yeah.
So I think I turned it on to send a message or something like that. And then I left it on and the slider went all the way over, engaged the SOS, and then the battery died. So I'm up with Abby.
Okay.
We're hunting. And then we just get a weird pocket of cell phone reception and just get like 5 or 6 text messages. And so Panera was my emergency contact, which is, so he had gotten a call from the Garmin headquarters or whatever in Texas. So as soon as there's an alert or whatever, it goes there, then they call the emergency contact saying, hey,
in that
from this person.
Okay. Yeah.
So said, hey, we got a distress signal from Jack and you try to reach him. Troopers were also deployed. I think the technician or whoever in Texas contacted the troopers.
State troopers?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they go near where the thing is, which is where Ab and I used to live at Buckingham's. So troopers show up and Panera shows up and Rob is panicked. He's worried. He knows that we've gone up the mountain to hunt. So he just starts running up the hill. Trying to get to this spot because it was like 200 yards from where we took off. So it's like right up from the house. So you can almost see it. So
it's like, hey, maybe somebody's cut.
He's starting to yell and just going through Devil's Club and whatnot. But we're already up on the top shelf. We're already way up there. We finally get the text message. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And I don't have enough cell phone
to tell them. That's even worse.
Yeah. So I come back down there and they were worried. Multiple things. A, that the thing went off, and then they weren't sure if Abby was with me because maybe she had it, maybe it had gone off for her, and maybe we'd split. So
a lot of different scenarios could have played out there.
Yeah. So Panera Pader is trustworthy because he showed up.
Yeah.
Garmin called the people in Texas, and the technician followed through with stuff. So there's a trooper there, but Pader didn't go up the mountain searching for me. Rob did. So he hung out there and was talking with the trooper. So I got the new ones that are made by Garmin. Like I said, I bought the DeLorme one maybe close to 8-9 years ago. It was right before. So the unit is much better, not easier to use and more difficult to accidentally send the distress.
But it's going to still play out the same way.
Still say the same way. So while the unit was old, the new technology after it was bought by Garmin, the whole process will still be the same thing. So that was like the 2 years.
You know what? You're making me now think I need to have that schematic on my wall for my particular boat. So let's say one does have a distress. I know it's going to go X, Y, Z, and these people will be contacted.
Yeah.
Because the 406, I assume EPIRB goes to the Coast Guard, and that probably is how it's played out. But would they then contact? Would there be a false alarm sequence?
Yeah, I'm not sure because if you do have that on a boat.
Yeah, the immediate thing is going to be they're going to go to the immediate response, I would think.
So I think the technician might locate or might contact either Coast Guard or troopers, depending on where the thing is.
So I have 2 on each boat. I have the 406 EPIRB, and then I also have the Zoleo, which is kind of a different version of a Garmin InReach or whatever. It's a satellite-based device that will have it has an emergency response deal. But then there's a third one that we haven't talked about, and that's on the VHF radios in boats. There's a distress on a lot of modern VHFs. There's an emergency button on there, which I've never utilized or even investigated. I've seen them more as an annoyance than anything. But
what's the difference between that and like being on 16?
Well, it probably does go to the Coast Guard. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just something that you can push quickly and not make a verbal distress.
You can be on your secret fishing channel and go right to, rather than have to dial it back down to 16.
I don't know. It's just on a lot of VHFs now, and here we are talking about safety and kind of showing my ignorance on that. That might be something we could come back on another episode.
Well, whenever I'm on I just use the radio. I just have it on 16. I don't even do anything else.
16 is what we always said, hailing and distress.
Yeah.
That's the nature of that channel, which a lot of people get wrong.
Yeah.
It's to hail somebody and then change to a working channel, they call it, if you want to converse. Or, hey, I'm in trouble. X, Y, Z.
Or to talk trash about non-locals.
Yeah.
It's always funny that you hear the people trolling by the time August comes around. I can't wait till all these people get out of here, this or that. And they're like, hey, Charlie, did you have fun at the...
Yeah, and they don't realize...
You need to go up one, go down somewhere.
Yeah, go to 10, 67, whatever, yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of stuff, you're right, that is now more available for safety that wasn't around 30 to 40 years ago. And, it probably needs to be detailed more explicitly how it all works. I'm familiar with the 406 EPIRBs, but not like these InReaches, so it's good to know that.
Once the infrastructure was made, people are making products that don't revolutionize the infrastructure. They do new ways to utilize. Like on your phone, no one's reinventing the phone. They're just creating apps for the phone. So like these new features are so different than what the initial thing was made for. It's like, it utilizes this technology to do this. Oh, that's a new thing. I didn't know if we needed it, but
also, yeah, the way that Zoleo works is that it's just a communication device with a satellite, but you interface with it you interface with an app on your phone.
Yeah, same thing with the Garmin.
Yeah, the Garmin's didn't used to be that. They used to be you had to have a physical device. So now they're doing that, but the problem with that somewhat is that you need to have your phone with you. Say you go on a hike, you need to have the phone and the device together. And then phones' batteries go dead. And they just get dropped in the water.
That's exactly what they're meant to do. They're meant to be very brittle and fragile. And the battery so they can go out. So yeah, it's the problem with the all-in-one device is that if you lose that one thing, then you're
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
If you have another device that relies on the cell phone, then everything's fine as long as your cell phone, which is the most fragile of technological things. If that thing goes out, then you're in trouble.
I would think of the cell phone not as a primary safety device, because
if that's the way you interface with everything, then it becomes your mode of communication. But those, like I have the InReach Mini. I don't have the one where I think you can send preset stuff. I've never set the preset stuff because I just have the app on my phone, so I can send very specific things.
But would you say that in most, especially in Alaska, most of your outdoor hunting, fishing, would you say you have cell service 50% of the time, 70% of the time?
I'd probably say less.
Less?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't take much to be out of cell range in this country.
No, the AT&T signal you lose it pretty quick. You get some, like around Mountain Point, you start going south of town, like you
go around Point Alva, you don't get it.
Which is fine. Like I would rather not really have. It's kind of nice to be not reached. Like you're not going to be tempted
a lot of
to
people
do anything
want
else.
that.
But I guess there is a level of comfort just in case. You can update. When I did the fly out for Caribou a couple of years ago, it was awesome there's no need to be on the phone. It's like we track some stuff, look at the maps on there, but we weren't on it. So I think we were out there for 5 days, and I think we recharged it once or twice.
Have you heard about the Starlink now going to be able to interface with your phone? You're shaking your head.
I don't want it.
You don't want it.
I don't want it. I think it's a potentially a great convenience, but there's something about knowing that you have to be on top of your game. It's like, hey, we're at a cell phone service right here, so everything that I can.
You think it'll make people sloppier? Is that kind of what you think?
I think it might make me a little sloppier. I think it also there's a level of maybe distraction or convenience. Like I don't need to be setting stuff. Yeah, I need to be here.
You don't need to see the baby picture.
No, I don't want to be reached in the group chats or have many group chats. I just want to be, Rick Collins is off hella skiing somewhere or he's on some nice warm beach. Like,
did you have to really sully the podcast with Rick's name? I mean, really?
Yeah, he said, I'm really happy if you guys worked hard this year. Have a really good resting break. And then picture of him on a beach. I was like, Pennock looks really different this time of year.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Faster. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting take on Starlink. I think it's going to become ubiquitous, meaning that these phones, especially with that low Earth Starlink system, I think we're going to see that become more and more. You're going to have universal calling from everywhere you can get a signal.
Yeah.
And if it's a satellite signal, that's a lot of places. There are places you can't get satellite, but it's going to be everywhere. I guess I'm not against it, but I think that you will start hearing stories of people that think that's going to save them and they'll die.
A buddy of mine is working for a wildlife rescue, or not wildlife rescue, outdoor rescue, a volunteer rescue squad down in Wyoming, and said that people, when they're rescuing people, they tend to go up mountains to try to get cell phone reception rather than like down a drainage, knowing that this drainage leads to this road. So you're going to
they don't use regular survival skills.
No, because their impulse is, I need to get cell phone. This is the only way that I can be saved to go up. And that makes sense. So the people who are attempting to make the rescues have to keep that in mind, that the logical person who used to go down the drainage because it intersects with the road, just that basic sort of geography.
Or to a river and another big river.
Something like that. It's just go up for cell phone reception.
Wow. Yeah, that is a different idea.
I do like potentially the idea of like someone were to take your boat around Revilla and head Starlink. Like you could work remote.
Yeah.
Or you could, if you wanted to, you could also turn it off. But I mean, that'd be...
Nobody will.
No, you're just going to have it on and you'll spend a couple extra hours getting upset about whatever news is going on.
Yeah. So. Well, I have just an anecdote about that. This is back, when did Al Gore run against
2000?
2000. So 2000, I'm Dudley Crabbin. And the election happens on a Tuesday. I leave out, it's the results are unresolved when I leave. I'm gone for 3 days. I'm thinking, I'm going to come back and I'm going to find out who's the president. 4 days, 3 days later, come back, nothing's resolved because it's that long thing. And it just became a thing in my life. I'm like, man, I'm gone for 3 or 4 days and really not much has really happened to make a difference in my life.
The extra anxiety that we get from
the minute by minute.
And you just, that's not natural. Like that's too much anxiety for us to it's good to be informed on your, like, whatever you read. It used to be the paper and the nightly news. And now it's minute by minute hot takes from who knows who.
I love the term breaking. They use this term breaking.
It has no meaning.
You're a news guy.
There's no meaning.
It's no meaning. It's so ubiquitous that nothing's really breaking anymore. It's just.
So I think that not having the cell phone reception out there, it's nice because you're forced to. Like, you can't just, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes. I'm in a Forest Service cabin. I'm going to spend, just a half hour online. Like, no, just like when I was a kid and we'd go to the Sweetwater Lawn or Staney Creek over on Prince of Wales, we'd roll up the pieces of tinfoil and then have a home run contest.
Or that's what we did.
Or like sharpen sticks or hit rocks into. You were self-sufficient. You were creative in your entertainment.
We probably had one of the most memorable baseball games ever on the end of Pennock Island, and we brought not anything. We played with a cork we found on the beach, and a stick, and it's 10 teenage boys playing baseball until the tide came in. And I mean, epically fun. Everybody having a great time, and we didn't bring anything. We used a cork and a stick. And it was lovely. I
was in high school. Buddy Lars and Rob Buckingham. We took hatchets to some trees that have a diameter of maybe a foot or so, and we just notched them and made like a little cabin, and then hung an old seine net in the trees about 10, 15 feet up, and then like, this isn't as cool. So we put it up higher. And then we built a platform off that. And so we had like one person would have to run from one side of the forest to the other. And they were up there with paintball guns and
shooting at you. Oh, okay.
And then we also set up a basketball hoop. So you could jump out of the platform, dunk.
And land in the net.
Land in the net. We played 2-on-2 basketball in the net.
Up in the trees.
And this isn't even like little kid. This is like sophomore in high school.
No,
like
this is exactly the age I'm talking. But, I think we do romanticize, you see it with your kids at school. I see it with my kids. Because it's like saying, well, should we be in the 1800s and everybody working on a farm? I mean, I don't think we had a great childhood. We had these spontaneous things. We played in the woods. We played it out in remote areas. It may or may not be that for our kids or in the future. It doesn't mean that they won't find something else. I don't think their lives are ruined because of technology. I really don't want to go down that road.
No.
Because it's the kind of old people, the kids aren't what they used to be, Well, in the olden days, they also worked on farms and died when they're 50,
Yeah, the life expectancy was 46 in 1900.
And so do we really long for another era that didn't have health care either? I mean, kids died of childhood diseases.
Yeah, it's like you said, it romanticized that. There was that sweet spot there in the 80s and 90s when
loved it.
We didn't have that existential threat like you did in the 60s and 70s with the Cold War. Cold War was ending, and then there was just this sort of, the first thunder and lightning storm I thought was a nuclear attack when I was in college. I'd never been in a thunder and lightning storm. I thought we were getting attacked by the Russians. But back to this whole romanticizing your childhood. I was talking to these people in Homer when I was up there with this boat sail thing last week, and I was telling them how much our marine highway system is failing or is not as good as it used to be. And I was telling them, when I used to go on a trip for basketball or cross country, whatever, I would leave the house with $15 and see if I could come back with 15 because I would gamble the whole way to Juneau. And then we're talking quarter games, so it wasn't high stakes. It was so bad in the mid 80s there that finally the Alaska Marine Highway made a rule. You can't have cash on the table because we would gamble almost 24 hours a day. You use the sugar packets? We use the sugar packets.
Oh, we use
the Chimney Rock sugar packet was like worth $5. And then,
well, you're younger than me, but we were using matches. That's how we eventually went to matches. But I loved traveling on the ferries because it was a confined big party for teenagers, but it was relatively safe. It was safe, meaning, we're all, it's a big slumber party. For high school.
Like there's some social bullying thing. I remember some of that sort of stuff, but
I don't remember anything, but of course, whatever. I just remember having so much fun, and the kids would get on from Wrangell, Petersburg, whatever. But whatever. I'm romanticizing my childhood riding around on these ferries. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was like freedom. You're away from your house. Yeah. You're going to another town. You got some chaperones, but it's pretty much loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
great life.
Yeah. I think now the technology that's available, kids aren't limited to their 6 hours at school. So if you have teachers that are underwhelming, or if they happen to be gone, or whatever it is, you don't have to limit your learning. You can be online and you can learn so much stuff from podcasts.
We used
from
to have
YouTube. There's a kid who hasn't been able to get into, he wasn't able to get into shop his first 3 years of high school.
Right.
But that's what he loves to do. And he hasn't been able to get into class, which is horrible. But he's been able to just use YouTube to work on vehicles.
Learn on stuff.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's you're not limited again by it. So that's a potentially great thing.
Upside to technology.
Yeah.
The upside to technology is the kind of ubiquitous learning, and it's such a resource. And now we're way off the whole safety theme here, but the whole idea that, I mean, I used YouTube to fix my washer and dryer.
Yeah.
At home. And what could be better?
Yeah, well, one that works. It doesn't have to be replaced every 3 years. It's more less expensive to just replace the thing than it is to try to get someone.
Well, I think the principle I learned in college, and it holds true to this, is that what you learn in college is that you're not getting this huge set of information and knowledge, but what you're doing is you're getting the tools to learn how to learn.
Yeah.
You're getting access to a way of accessing information. And if you could pass that on to kids, well, with the internet, you have this crazy depth that you can get to. Now, that said, I did a test when I was teaching wood shop. And I said, because the kids believe this, that everything is accessible online. It's not. And I finally said to them one time, we have this sauna heater for this sauna we were building. I said, well, you guys tell me what city this sauna heater is built in. They never could find out. It was built in China somewhere. They just didn't know. They could never find the information where it was built. So,
yeah. We'll leave it at that. Yeah. About an hour here. Jesus. So thanks for being on here again.
They're still they're still listening now. Their lives are
loyal.
They're loyal.
You probably should give them a t-shirt or like a discounted boat rental from Bear Boat Alaska.
Definitely. Totally. Yeah. Call me up. We'll set you up.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thank you.